Do you remember this character from Bewitched? Yes, you do. It was impossible to forget her. She was the perfect mix of class and sass with her bright, flowy clothes, dramatic eye makeup, and razor-sharp wit. You knew something crazy or interesting was going to happen every time she came on screen. The mean things she said quickly, especially to her son-in-law Darren, were both smart and hurtful. Who else could do such a great job of changing a simple name like Darren to Durwood or Dum Dum? There was more to Endora than just a figure. She was an icon. Agnes Moorehead, the woman behind her, was also a star. But here's the catch. Agnes Moorhead didn't really enjoy being Endora. It's hard to believe, right? It seemed like the part was made just for her because she was so good at it. In reality, Bewitched was much later in her career, after she had already proven herself to be one of the best actors of her time. Agnes was making waves in Hollywood and on stage before she ever put a spell on Darren Stevens, becoming famous for things other than TV shows. Still, you can't talk about Agnes without bringing up Bewitched. There were a lot of firsts with the show itself. When it first aired in 1964, it was about Samantha Stevens, a beautiful witch who was trying to live a normal life with her human husband, Darren. Normal was never really a choice, though, because Samantha's magical family was always getting in the way. Samantha's mother, Endora, was the main source of trouble. She didn't just dislike Darren, she tried to make his life unpleasant and thought it was funny. Agnes brought something unique to the part. Endora became both likable and annoying because of her. She would plan to break up Samantha and Darren 1 minute and then be so proud of her grandkids, Tabitha and Adam, the next. She was mean, funny, and weird, just the kind of witchy mother-in-law you'd want. But to understand how Agnes turned into Endora, we need to go back in time. She was already a powerful woman before she turned people into toads on primetime TV. Let's talk about her first movie part. It happened in Citizen Kane. That is Citizen Kane, which is often called the best movie ever. In it, Agnes played Mary Kane, the mother of Charles Foster Kane. It was a new movie, even though it was her first movie. She gave such an amazing show that it proved she wasn't just another Hollywood hopeful. Her part was small but important, and it set the tone for the rest of her works. How did she get such a big part so quickly? Agnes wasn't exactly new to acting, though. She was already well known for her work with Orson Welles' Mercury Players, a well-known radio group. It was during her time on Welles' famous 1938 show of War of the Worlds that people thought aliens were attacking Earth. In order to make the jump to Hollywood, Welles brought Agnes with him because he knew she would shine, and she did. After Citizen Kane, Agnes played the lead role in The Magnificent Ambersons, which was another movie she worked on with Welles. This time she was nominated for an Academy Award for her part as Aunt Fanny Manifer. You know why if you've seen the movie. It was heartfelt, complex, and remarkable how she performed. It proved how good she was at giving her characters depth. She hadn't just played the part, she was living it. Let's go back in time to Bewitched. For the first episode of the show, Agnes had already shown that she was a serious performer. But there's something about Bewitched. It wasn't just a comedy, it was a huge hit. In its first season, it was the second most watched show in the United States. Fans loved how the show had magic, humor, and family drama all at the same time. Endora played a big role in that. Her fiery nature and funny one-liners made her a character that stood out. She was always there, even when the episode wasn't about her. But Agnes didn't think Bewitched was her best work. She was used to dramatic movies and plays, so the fast-paced world of TV shows was a big change for her. She put everything she had into the part, though, and it showed. Endora wasn't just a witch from a cartoon. Agnes gave her depth, pride, openness, and even some heart. Still, it's important to remember that Agnes' work didn't end with TV. With her wide range, she could surprise people. Look at what she did in The Twilight Zone. Her role in an episode called The Invaders was that of a woman who was being scared by tiny aliens. It's crazy that there wasn't much dialogue in the show. Everything was shown through Agnes's body language and facial reactions. Many people think it was one of the best episodes of the show, which shows how skilled she was. There's also the psychological film Hush Hush, Sweet Charlotte, in which she stars with Bette Davis and Olivia de Havilland. I thought Agnes did a great job in the movie. It showed that she could play any part and make it memorable. Agnes Moorehead was a seasoned pro by the time Bewitched came along. She worked with famous people like Orson Welles during Hollywood's golden age and became one of the most admired character actors in the business. But when she joined TV in the 1960s, it was a whole new world for her. She went into it with all of her normal talent and sharp opinions. She didn't give it much thought when she agreed to play Endora in 1964. She later said she hadn't thought the show would do well at all. Is it your fault? It wasn't common for actors with her level of skill to work on TV at the time. Even so, Samantha's part is still amazing. She was a human mother who hated her children. It was agreed that she would only be in 8 of the 12 shows. This would give her plenty of time to work on other things. That way she could balance her duty to the show with her need to find work that made her happier. That was smart, right? But this is where things got tricky. Bewitched was more than just a small hit. It became a big deal. The show quickly became one of the 10 most watched shows in the United States after its first season. All of a sudden, Agnes became famous in a whole new way. It was a surprising change for a woman who had already built a great career. Endora's over-the-top attitude was loved by kids, and her sharp wit was loved by adults. Agnes made the part so interesting that she stole every scene she was in. You couldn't take your eyes off of her, whether she was talking to Darren in a dramatic way or putting him under a spell. But let's be honest, Agnes wasn't really happy. When she talked to TV Guide in 1965, she called the show's writing hack. Too harsh? Perhaps. In some ways, she wasn't totally wrong. At the time, sitcoms weren't known for having very original plots, and the part of Endora probably felt a little too small for someone like Agnes, who had been giving highly acclaimed performances for years. The part was okay for her, but it wasn't hard. In her talks, she made that very clear. People liked the role, though, and Agnes gave it her all. She was nominated for 6 Emmys for her work on the show, which is pretty amazing when you think about it. But whenever someone tried to limit her work to Bewitched, she quickly told them she had done a lot more. She told the New York Daily News in 1965, "I've been in movies and played theater from coast to coast before Bewitched. I was pretty well known. It bothers me that people will think of me as the witch. That must be really frustrating, but it's easy to see why." Agnes had worked hard for years to become a real actress, but now everyone only talked about her as Endora. Even though she had mixed views about her job, there was one thing she really liked about it. Agnes had nothing but good things to say about her co-star Elizabeth Montgomery, who played Samantha. She praised how professional and friendly she was. It was clear that they got along on TV, which is why so many people loved seeing them together. Agnes loved Montgomery very much. People often say that she's a pleasure to work with. But not everyone on the set liked Agnes so much. Things got a little chilly when Dick Sargent took over as Darren from Dick York in 1969. Agnes didn't try to hide the fact that she didn't like the move. York had to leave the show because of ongoing health problems. Agnes didn't like the change, but it had to happen. She liked York and thought he had great funny timing. She was said to have treated Sargent with a noticeable chill when he took over the job. Sargent later said she did make him cry more than once. It wasn't about them. Agnes didn't like change, especially when it affected a relationship she liked very much. She and Sargent got along well over time, but their relationship never quite got as warm as her friendship with York. Even so, Agnes stuck with the show until it stopped in 1972. She had worn Endora's fancy clothes for 8 years by that point, insulting people and taking scenes. She played the part with such professionalism and style that it became unforgettable, even though it wasn't her best part. Also, let's not forget how she affected younger people. She wasn't just a nosy mother-in-law to them. It was like she was magic. Her flashy clothes and lively attitude made her a kid favorite, and many of them wished they could twitch their noses and make things happen like Samantha. Agnes was able to work on other projects in between shooting Bewitched. One of these was a 1965 Chevrolet commercial with Dan Blocker from Bonanza. The spot was funny and cheerful, and it showed how versatile she is as a performer. She often said in interviews that she didn't like how fast-paced and unorganized TV was, but she never let that get in the way of her work. She put in the same amount of effort into every job, whether it was an important part or a silly one for a car ad. When it came to interviews, Agnes had strong feelings about the show business. It was her opinion that performers should keep a certain mystery. She didn't believe in behind-the-scenes pictures and interviews when asked about them. She said that it breaks the fantasy. Agnes thought that acting was all about making a world for the audience to get lost in. She thought that revealing everything took away from that experience. Even though it's an old-fashioned way of doing things, it fits with her general style. She was good at what she did and expected others to be too. Even though Agnes Moorehead had a great career, the problems she faced in her later years were still too much for her to handle. In the 1970s, her health started to get worse, but she kept working with the same drive that had always been a part of her life. She was in a lot of projects that were very different from the magical world of Bewitched. After that, she mostly played parts in darker, more haunting stories, as if she were trying to find a new side of herself. During this time, Night Gallery was one of her best efforts. In an episode called Something Shadows on the Wall, she played a dying woman who keeps coming back to haunt her family. It was creepy and powerful, and it showed how well she could control the screen even though her health was getting worse. Agnes did this more than once, though. After that, she had parts in scary movies like What's the Matter with Helen, with Debbie Reynolds and Shelley Winters. Then there was Dear Dead Delilah, a low-budget movie in which she played the lead part of a killer with an axe. It was her last lead part. She was still willing to take risks on that job, even though it wasn't a big deal. She had been in the business for decades. Even though Agnes tried her hand at horror, she always came back to her theater roots. She played the same part in Don Juan in Hell that she had played earlier in her career. This time, there were a lot of big names on stage with her, like Edward Mulhare, Ricardo Montalban, and Paul Henreid. Theater had always been one of her biggest loves, and she seemed to find comfort there as her health got worse while her love for performing stayed strong. But Agnes had another side that a lot of people don't know about. It wasn't just a show for her. She taught too. She had her own acting school where she taught her students to be disciplined and to respect the art form. She believed in working hard, getting ready, and being dedicated. Being skilled wasn't enough. You had to enjoy the job. That was Agnes all the way through. She loved performing so much that she even did speech work. In 1973, she did the part of the goose in an animated version of Charlotte's Web. It was a warm and funny part that made her later work a little more fun. Another part she played was Aunt Alicia in the Broadway version of Gigi. Even so, That wasn't always easy. Because her health had gotten worse, she had to leave the show before it was over. Arlene Francis filled in for her. Agnes was still working in January 1974, just a few months before she died. She was in the first show of the CBS Radio Mystery Theater, which was the medium that made her famous in the first place. It was too good to be true. One last look back to the start of her trip. Agnes's personal life was just as complicated as her work life. She was married twice. Both of them didn't last. In 1930, she married singer John Griffith Lee. In the 1950s, they took in a boy named Sean Lee as a foster child, but they split up a year later. In her second marriage, she was married to actor Robert Gist for only 4 years. It was said that she had a secret love life for decades.